Well, and now our final help video of the data cycle. We had an overview video. Hopefully you watched that. And then we went through the first step of the data cycle, which was ask questions, and the second step, which was considering data. And now I combine the two of analyze and interpret data to just finalize the data cycle help here with answer our questions and be ready to tell our data story. Now that we know which rows and which columns we're focusing in on, after we've had a good question we've asked, and we know exactly what we're looking at in our data, that is now focused our minds to think about, well, which displays will we need to use? Could be more than one. I made a little chart here to help us think this through. If it's one variable in my question, one column that I'm looking at, is that column categorical or quantitative? Because I know which displays are quantitative and which are categorical. And that's my bar chart and pie charts would be your categorical, whereas box plots and histograms would be quantitative. Do I want to show the quantities or do percentages with my categorical variables? Need to make that decision. If it's quantitative, am I more interested in showing that spread and having that 5-number summary really clear and the median, or do I want to see that clear shape and I'm okay with the bins and being a little bit more of an estimate about where the beginning and ending are just with my bin size and choosing that? That's a decision that I need to make now. If it's two variables, I have tools for that, whether it's categorical or quantitative. If it's quantitative, then I'm looking at a scatter plot, and maybe if I want to add a categorical variable to it, I might want to go image scatter plot. If it's too categorical, we have tools for that in Bootstrap as well now with our multi-bar and our stacked bars, and there's a lesson in the bar chart that has students explore what types of questions they should do with each, and that's in another help video. Now we're ready to look at the data cycle pages that take us to analyze. Let's go to that third step. We've done questions and considering data, and so let's look at that analyze. That analyze is to now write the code for that display that I've chosen. We just start with students with a simple one, just using count. Okay. How many of each species are at the shelter? We're going to write the count. Which rows do I care about? It's all the animals, so I need all the rows. How many of each species? That's the species column. And so I'm going to here put the count of the species column using my contract here for count, and that's what we've got here. And our result is this table right here, giving us a count. And these are arithmetic questions because it's doing a calculation on a single column. How many of each sex are at the shelter? It's the same thing, only we're now doing the same thing here, but instead of species, we would put sex in there, and we get the count by sex. So they do a shortened version of that, just adding the third step. Then we can go and add the fourth step, which is interpret. Now that we've got our code and we get our graphs and our charts, we need to now interpret. Well, here's the part that I love. All of the first time that you see a data cycle page with any of the displays, there will be a closed structure, closed sentence structures for those displays, giving students an idea of how to interpret that particular display. So we have an expanded animals data set that has a lot more animals in it and brings a lot more interest to it. And here's one where we send them off to expanded animal starter file and say, well, now look at this one. Are there more fixed or unfixed animals? And at this point, you're going to be looking at all of the rows and your fixed column with this more animals, and taking a look at a pie chart to determine the answer here. But what I want you to focus on is this interpret data section right here. And it gives a closed structure. The chart shows and then gives them a fill in the blank closed structure, way to answer that question, and then always that sends them to ask more questions. The second part then asks them a question and says, well, now use a stacked bar chart. How does the ratio of fixed to unfixed animals differ by species? So now they're going to be looking again at all the rows, and they're going to need 2 columns. Oh, here's our 2 categorical columns, and we're going to do a stacked bar. And here is a way in which they can write a sentence to interpret that. And they say, oh, I also noticed something else about it. Here is our distribution of fixed, and you can see that we did have more this time unfixed than fixed. Then they can give the percentages and talk about. Go to that stacked bar chart, and one of the things it talked about is it seems that within the species that you could see that it appears to be more unfixed than fixed. And even one of the notices is that none of the clownfish or the snails were fixed. I noticed snails and clownfish are not fixed at all. And so that raises a question. Do mammals get fixed more often than other animals? They would come up with their own questions, of course. So be sure to use these data cycle pages for this very important step in that analysis process, because it gives them that structure. A lot of students have a hard time. What do I say? How do I interpret this? And we give them some idea here about what to write. And so I threw in here some of the other interpret sections from, you see here what the histogram gives, the closed structure, the box plot, and even the linear regression with some, this one has some data thrown in for you to just see the examples. Really good structure for them to follow a model. They can modify it as they wish, of course, but the model is there for them to follow in their workbook or however you give them that. Also notice that every time we ask them at the end, what do you wonder about? Remember that data cycle always leads them to ask additional questions, because usually what we find out leads us to wonder about something else. And then finally, now that they have gone through this whole process, they're, like we just said, that wondering leads them to more questions, yes, but they need to tell their story. And so you've got your data cycle will lead them to their own data set to tell their own story in that chosen data set, whether it's Pokemon or earthquakes or whatever data set you've led them to. We have data cycle pages where they will be all along the way. They do box plot with animals, and then they'll do box plot in their chosen data set, and there is a data cycle page for it. This is a box plot one here, and they'll come up with their own question, create their own box plot, and analyze it. And what you'll do is in this interpret place, let them see that model that was written here for box plot in animals, and then come and do their interpretation for their own data set. And they'll be able to tell their own data story for the data that they're encouraged to write about and excited to write about, something that they have chosen to dig into. So there you have it, data cycle, dig in.